"I saw you," she hissed, her voice a weapon wrapped in silk. "Don't you dare lie to me." Her perfectly manicured finger jabbed toward the glistening python handbag on the marble countertop, then at the young woman standing opposite her. Zari didn't flinch, her gaze steady. "Ma'am, I was admiring the craftsmanship," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I wasn't—" "Oh, spare me your excuses," Carolyn sneered, her eyes sweeping over Zari's simple jeans and university sweatshirt with undisguised contempt. "You people are all the same. You think you can just walk in here and take whatever you want." A few feet away, another shopper quietly raised her phone, the small red light of a recording blinking to life. The boutique, nestled in Dallas's opulent Highland Park village, was designed to feel like a sanctuary of wealth. Sunlight streamed through the arched windows, glinting off glass displays and the golden hardware of $1,000 purses. It was a world away from Zari's own, a quiet, middle-class neighborhood in Oak Cliff. She was here for a specific purpose: to buy a graduation gift for her mother, a beautiful silk scarf she'd saved up for over 6 months. She had just reached for it when the accusation, sharp and sudden as a gunshot, had echoed through the store. Carolyn Caldwell was a caricature of Dallas old money. Her blonde hair was coiffed into a helmet of perfection, her face a taut mask of cosmetic enhancement, and her tweed suit was likely worth more than Zari's first car. She moved with an air of absolute ownership, not just of her possessions, but of the very space she occupied. And right now, she had decided that Zari was an invader. "I was admiring the bag," Zari repeated, her voice betraying no hint of the tremor she felt inside. She had been through this before, the unsubtle trailing by security, the pointed questions about whether she needed help, the assumption that her presence was a precursor to a crime. But this was different. This was a direct, public assault. The store manager, a man named Philip, scurried over, his face pale and beaded with sweat. He recognized Caroline Caldwell, a VIP client. He did not recognize Zari. His choice was made before he even spoke. "Is there a problem, Mrs. Caldwell?" he asked, his tone obsequious. He didn't even glance at Zari. "This person," Caroline spat, waving a dismissive hand, "was about to slip this handbag into her backpack. It's a $5,000 bag, Philip." It was a lie, a complete fabrication born of prejudice. Zari's backpack was slung over her shoulder, zipped tight. She hadn't even touched the handbag. "That is not true," Zari said, looking directly at Philip. "I was looking at the scarf next to it. You can check your security cameras." Philip's eyes darted nervously between the two women. "Mrs. Caldwell is a valued customer," he mumbled, his gaze fixed on the floor. "Perhaps it would be best if you just left." Humiliation washed over Zari, hot and suffocating. She was being convicted without a trial, her guilt presumed based on the color of her skin and the brand of her clothes. "So you're taking her word over mine? You won't even check the evidence?" "There's nothing to check," Caroline interjected, smiling now, a cruel, triumphant twist of her lips. "Your kind is always so dramatic. Just leave before I decide to call the police and have you arrested for attempted theft. I imagine you have a record already." The words were designed to break her, to strip her of her dignity. Zari could feel the eyes of the other shoppers on her, a mixture of pity, discomfort, and veiled agreement. In that moment, she made a choice. She would not cry, she would not scream, she would remember. She looked at Caroline, then at Philip, her gaze holding a weight that neither of them understood. "You will regret this," she said, her voice low and clear. It wasn't a threat, it was a statement of fact. She turned and walked out of the store, the chime of the doorbell sounding like a final mocking laugh. She didn't see the college student, Maya, lower her phone, and immediately start uploading the video. Before Zari had even reached her car, the clip was live on TikTok. Maya typed a caption. Karen accuses innocent black girl of stealing in Highland Park. Make this go viral. She added the hashtags. Boutique bigot. Shopping while black. Dallas racism. The internet did the rest. Within an hour, the video had 100,000 views. By evening, it was over 1 million. The comment section was a raging fire. That poor girl. She was so calm, I would have lost it. Éclat boutique, huh? Never shopping there again. Does anyone know who that rich witch is? Let's find her. And they did. Within hours, internet sleuths had identified Caroline Caldwell. Her name, her husband's name, the charities she sat on the boards of. It was all public. The digital mob descended. Éclat Boutique's Yelp and Google pages were flooded with 1-star reviews. News outlets started calling their corporate office. The hashtag #ChirtourBoutiqueBigot was trending nationally. Zari sat at her kitchen table, watching the digital storm she had inadvertently created. Her phone buzzed incessantly with messages from friends who had seen the video. Her initial humiliation was slowly being replaced by a cold, simmering resolve. Caroline Caldwell and Éclat Boutique had judged her on sight, assuming she was powerless. They were about to learn how wrong they were. 3 days after the incident, the backlash was a full-blown corporate crisis for Éclat Boutique and a personal inferno for Caroline Caldwell. She had been forced to resign from 2 charity boards, and her husband's investment firm was fielding angry calls from clients. A lesser person might have issued a grudging apology, a carefully worded statement crafted by a public relations team. Caroline Caldwell was not a lesser person. She believed the cardinal sin was not being racist, but being caught. In her mind, Zari was not a victim. She was the architect of her humiliation. And she would pay. The doorbell rang on a Thursday afternoon. Zari's mother, a high school English teacher named Lena, opened it to find a stern-looking man in a suit holding a thick manila envelope. "Delivery for Zari Henderson," he said, not meeting her eye. He handed over the packet and left. Inside was a lawsuit. Caroline Caldwell was suing Zari for defamation, slander, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The lawsuit claimed Zari had orchestrated the event, conspired with the person recording, and that the deceptively edited video had caused irreparable harm to Mrs. Caldwell's pristine reputation. She was seeking $5 million in damages. Lena's hands trembled as she read the document. Her husband, David, an aerospace engineer, read it over her shoulder, his face hardening into a mask of disbelief and fury. "This is insane," he breathed. "This is a scare tactic. She's a billionaire trying to crush a teenager with legal fees." Zari walked into the living room, took the papers from her mother's hands, and began to read. Her face was a study in concentration, her eyes scanning the legalese with an unnerving calm. Her parents watched her, their hearts aching with fear for their daughter. They knew how brilliant she was, how she'd graduated high school at 16 and was already finishing her bachelor's degree online. But this was a different world, a world of vicious lawyers and endless money. When Zari finished reading, she looked up at her parents. The fear in their eyes was palpable. "Don't worry," she said, her voice steady. "She has no case. This is a frivolous lawsuit, meant to intimidate me into silence." "But Zari, honey, we can't afford a lawyer to fight this," Lena said, her voice cracking. "A man like her husband can keep this tied up in court for years. It could ruin us." Zari took a deep breath. It was time. She had been waiting for the right moment to tell them, wanting it to be a celebration, not a declaration of war. But the universe had other plans. "I don't need to hire a lawyer," she said softly. She walked to her bedroom and returned with a framed certificate. She handed it to her parents. It was from the State Bar of Texas. It certified that Zari Henderson, having passed the examination and fulfilled all other requirements, was licensed to practice law in the state of Texas. The date on the certificate was 3 months prior. Her parents stared at it, then at her, their minds struggling to process the information. You took the bar exam?" David whispered. Zari nodded. "I was part of an experimental early entry program at the university. I've been taking law courses since I was 15. I took the exam in February. I wanted to wait until my college graduation to tell you." A slow smile spread across her father's face, a look of pure, unadulterated pride. Lena burst into tears, but this time they were tears of shock and relief. She pulled her daughter into a fierce hug. "My baby," she whispered. "My baby is a lawyer." The next morning, Zari put on the most professional outfit she owned, a simple black blazer and slacks. She drove downtown to the George L. Allen Senior Courts building, a formidable granite structure where justice was dispensed daily. Walking through the doors, she felt the weight of history, both inspiring and intimidating. She ignored the curious looks from court officials and seasoned lawyers who saw only a teenager, out of place in their hallowed halls. At the clerk's office, she handed over the lawsuit papers and a document she had prepared the night before. "I'm here to file my pro se appearance," she told the clerk. The clerk, a woman with tired eyes and a stack of files teetering on her desk, looked at Zari over her glasses. "Honey, pro se means you're representing yourself. Are you sure you know what you're doing? This is a multi-million-dollar suit." "I'm sure," Zari said. She slid her state bar card across the counter. The clerk picked it up. Her eyes widened as she read the name and bar number. She looked from the card to Zari's face, then back to the card. A slow, disbelieving smile spread across her face. She stamped the paperwork with a satisfying thud. "Well, I'll be," she said, handing the card back. "Good luck to you, counselor." Zari walked out of the courthouse and into the bright Texas sun. The first move had been made. The shock and awe campaign was just beginning. The preliminary hearing was set for 2 weeks later. The courtroom was on the 5th floor, a cavernous space with dark wood paneling and the Great Seal of Texas looming over the judge's bench. The air was cold and smelled of old paper and floor wax. It was designed to make ordinary people feel small. Zari, however, felt a strange sense of belonging. This was her arena now. Carolyn Caldwell arrived with an entourage, including her stone-faced husband and her lawyer, Arthur Vance. Vance was exactly the kind of lawyer Zari had expected. Expensive suit, silver hair, and an ego that entered the room a full 10 seconds before he did. He'd built a career representing the powerful against the inconvenient, and he viewed this case as a simple pest extermination. He saw Zari sitting alone at the defendant's table and smirked, whispering something to Caroline that made her laugh. He assumed she was an intern, or perhaps a paralegal sent by whatever legal aid lawyer her family had scraped together. The bailiff's voice boomed. "All rise. The 191st Civil District Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Evelyn Reed presiding." Judge Reed was a woman in her late 50s with a reputation for being sharp, impatient, and utterly unimpressed by the wealth or status of anyone who appeared before her. She settled into her high-backed chair and peered down at the courtroom over her reading glasses. "We are here for the preliminary hearing in the matter of Caldwell versus Henderson. Mr. Vance, I've read your creative filing. Are you ready to proceed?" "Yes, Your Honor," Vance said, striding to the lectern. "Arthur Vance on behalf of the plaintiff, Mrs. Caroline Caldwell. We are here today because my client, a respected philanthropist and businesswoman, has been the victim of a malicious and defamatory attack, orchestrated by the defendant." Judge Reed looked toward Zari's table. "And for the defendant?" Zari stood, her heart pounding a steady, powerful rhythm. Zari Henderson, Your Honor, for the defendant. Vance let out a small, condescending chuckle. Your Honor, with all due respect, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. We're asking for the defendant's counsel to identify themselves, not the defendant herself. There is no misunderstanding, Mr. Vance, Zari said, her voice ringing with clarity in the silent courtroom. I am the defendant, and I am also her counsel of record. A murmur rippled through the gallery, where a few reporters, drawn by the viral nature of the case, had gathered. Vance's smirk froze on his face. He stared at Zari as if she'd just claimed to be from Mars. Your Honor, this is absurd. This is a child playing dress-up. I must demand to see her credentials. I was about to ask for them myself, Judge Reed said, her expression unreadable. She gestured to the bailiff. Counselor, please present your bar card and a state-issued ID to the bailiff. Zari calmly walked to the bailiff, handed him her Texas bar card and her driver's license. The bailiff, a large man who had seen everything, examined them, raised an eyebrow, and carried them up to the judge. The courtroom was dead silent. Judge Reed put on her glasses and studied the cards. She typed something into her computer, her eyes scanning the screen. She looked up, her gaze lingering on Zari for a long moment. An almost imperceptible hint of a smile touched her lips. The credentials appear to be in order, Judge Reed announced, her voice flat, but with an undercurrent of something that sounded like amusement. Ms. Henderson is a member in good standing of the State Bar of Texas. Welcome to the courtroom, Counselor. Now, Mr. Vance, you were saying? The color drained from Arthur Vance's face. Carolyn Caldwell looked as though she'd been slapped. The reporters in the gallery were typing furiously, the clicks of their keyboards like a sudden hailstorm. The power dynamic in the room had not just shifted. It had been completely inverted. Vance, for the first time in what was likely decades, was utterly flustered. Well, Your Honor, this is highly irregular. What's irregular about a licensed attorney representing a client, even if that client is herself? Judge Reed countered. Proceed with your argument. Vance stumbled through his points, his polished arrogance replaced by a sputtering disbelief. He argued that the lawsuit was valid, that Zari's actions constituted a clear case of defamation. When it was Zari's turn, she walked to the lectern with a poise that belied her years. She didn't use notes. She spoke clearly and concisely. Your Honor, this lawsuit is a classic slap suit, a strategic lawsuit against public participation. It is a meritless claim filed with the sole purpose of silencing and intimidating a victim of public discrimination. The plaintiff was not defamed. Her own actions were documented and reported on. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation. She then began citing precedent, quoting from past Texas Supreme Court rulings on free speech and anti-SLAPP statutes. Her legal reasoning was flawless, her delivery confident. Vance, who had relied on bluster and reputation, looked completely out of his depth. Zari concluded her argument. Therefore, Your Honor, we will not only be seeking a full dismissal of this case under the Texas Citizens Participation Act, but we will also be filing a countersuit against Mrs. Caldwell for malicious prosecution. Furthermore, we request an immediate start to the discovery process. Specifically, we request all internal and external communications from Eclat Boutique regarding the incident, all corporate handbooks and training materials related to customer service and loss prevention, and a full, unedited copy of the security footage from the date of the incident. Vance shot to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. This is a fishing expedition. The boutique's corporate policies are irrelevant to Mrs. Caldwell's personal defamation claim. On the contrary, Zari shot back. Mrs. Caldwell's public statements and actions were made on the premises of a business. Whether that business has a pattern or policy of encouraging such discriminatory behavior is directly relevant to the context of the incident she claims was defamatory. It speaks to her state of mind and the veracity of her claims. Judge Reed leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with interest. She looked from the flustered, high-priced lawyer to the composed 17-year-old prodigy. "Objection overruled," she said. "Motion to compel discovery is granted. Mr. Vance, get her the documents." She banged her gavel. "We are adjourned." The boxes arrived a week later. Dozens of them, filled with thousands of pages of documents, dumped on her family's doorstep by a courier. It was another intimidation tactic by Arthur Vance. Drown the young lawyer in paperwork, hoping she'd miss something crucial. He underestimated Zari. For her, this was a treasure hunt. Night after night, fueled by coffee and a burning sense of purpose, she sat at the dining room table, surrounded by stacks of paper. Her parents would watch her, a highlighter in hand, her brow furrowed in concentration, and marvel at her discipline. She cross-referenced employee rosters with termination dates, searched for keywords in digital files, and built a timeline of events. Slowly, a disturbing picture emerged. She found records of at least a dozen customer complaints against Eclat Boutique in various cities over the past 5 years. The complaints were all strikingly similar: accusations of being followed, unwarranted bag searches, and being refused service. The complainants were, without exception, people of color. Each complaint had been resolved with a confidential settlement and a non-disclosure agreement. It was a clear, documented pattern of corporate-sanctioned racial profiling systematically buried. The real breakthrough came on a Tuesday evening. An email arrived from an anonymous, encrypted address. The subject line was simple: "I was the manager. It was Philip." His email was short and desperate. After the video went viral, Eclat's parent company, a massive conglomerate called Luxstyle Holdings, had fired him. They were making him the scapegoat, claiming he acted alone in violating their supposed zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. He was facing financial ruin and was terrified. But he was also angry. "They made us do it," he wrote. It wasn't a written policy, nothing that could be easily traced. It was a culture. It came down from the top. We were told in management meetings to pay special attention to certain clientele to prevent shrinkage. Everyone knew what that meant. Caroline Caldwell isn't just some random rich lady. She sits on the board of directors for Luxstyle Holdings. She knew the culture because she helped create it. Attached to the email were several documents. One was a memo from a regional manager outlining enhanced security protocols for high-traffic urban stores. Another was a list of board members for Luxstyle Holdings. And there it was: Carolyn M. Caldwell, Director. Zari's breath caught in her throat. This changed everything. The lawsuit wasn't just a personal vendetta, it was a calculated corporate maneuver. Caroline, as a board member, was using her personal wealth and legal power to crush a victim of her company's own discriminatory practices before the victim could expose the entire rotten system. The defamation suit was a shield, designed to prevent a much larger, more damaging lawsuit against Luxstyle. Zari now understood the battlefield completely. She wasn't just fighting a bully, she was fighting a corporation. Her countersuit for malicious prosecution was no longer just a tactic. It was the tip of the spear. She spent the next few days preparing, her strategy shifting from defense to offense. She drafted a subpoena for Caroline Caldwell to appear for a deposition. She also subpoenaed the CEO of Luxstyle Holdings, demanding he produce all board meeting minutes for the past 2 years, where store security or loss prevention was discussed. Arthur Vance's office called her, furious. "You are overreaching, Ms. Henderson," he barked over the phone. "My client's position on a board is a private matter. It has no bearing on this case." "It has every bearing on this case, Mr. Vance," Zari replied, her voice cool as ice. Your client used her position of power within a corporate structure to target me, a customer, in one of her company's stores. She is now using this lawsuit to cover up her company's history of discrimination. It speaks directly to motive and credibility. The deposition will proceed as scheduled. If you try to quash it, I'll file a motion to compel, and we can have this argument in front of Judge Reed. I suspect she will be very interested in this new information." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Vance knew he was trapped. Judge Reed would almost certainly grant Zari's motion. He had been outmaneuvered. "Fine," he snapped, and hung up. Zari leaned back in her chair, a grim smile on her face. The discovery phase was over. She had the truth. Now it was time to deploy it. The deposition took place in a soulless conference room on the 40th floor of a downtown skyscraper. The view of the Dallas skyline was spectacular, but Zari paid it no mind. Her focus was on the woman sitting across the polished mahogany table. Caroline Caldwell. Caroline, flanked by a very tense Arthur Vance and another junior lawyer, looked utterly confident. She was in her element, a world of power suits and high-stakes legal battles. She smiled at Zari, a condescending saccharine expression. My, she said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "Shouldn't you be in school?" Zari ignored the jibe. She sat perfectly still, her legal pad and a single pen placed neatly before her. A court reporter sat at the end of the table, her fingers poised over her stenotype machine. "Let the record show," Zari began, her voice formal and clear, "that this is the sworn deposition of the plaintiff, Caroline Caldwell, in the case of Caldwell versus Henderson. Ms. Caldwell, do you understand that you are under oath and that you must answer all questions truthfully?" "Of course, dear," Caroline said, waving a flippant hand. "I'm not the one with a history of dishonesty." Zari began slowly, methodically. She asked about Caroline's background, her education, her philanthropic work. She had Caroline describe, in her own words, her reputation in the community. Caroline preened, detailing her charitable donations and her commitment to making Dallas a better place for everyone. Zari let her talk, feeding her ego, lulling her into a state of comfortable arrogance. Then, Zari shifted gears. "Mrs. Caldwell, let's talk about the day of the incident at the Eclat boutique. You stated in your complaint that you saw me attempting to steal a handbag. Is that correct?" "Yes, it is," Caroline said firmly. "Could you describe exactly what you saw? What specific actions led you to believe I was stealing?" Caroline's story was vague. "You were loitering. You had a large backpack. You were looking at the bag in a suspicious way." "In a suspicious way?" Zari pressed. "What does that look like?" "I know it when I see it," Caroline snapped. Vance put a restraining hand on her arm. Zari nodded, making a note on her pad. She then produced a series of glossy photos. "Mrs. Caldwell, I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit A. Do you recognize this person?" It was a picture of Caroline, smiling at a charity gala. "Yes, it's me." "And Exhibit B?" Zari continued, showing a screenshot of a post from Caroline's Instagram. The caption read, "So proud to support organizations that lift up our entire community." Did you write this caption, Mrs. Caldwell? "I believe so, yes." For the next hour, Zari continued this pattern, juxtaposing Caroline's carefully curated public image with her actions in the video. The contrast was jarring. Then, Zari slid a new document across the table. "Mrs. Caldwell, I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit G. This is a list of the board of directors for a company called Luck-Style Holdings. Do you see your name on this list?" Vance immediately spoke up. "Objection? Relevance?" "It's a deposition, Mr. Vance, you can't object," Zari said calmly, not taking her eyes off Caroline. "However, the relevance is that Luck-Style Holdings is the parent company of Eclat Boutique. Mrs. Caldwell, isn't it true that you have a fiduciary duty to act in the best interest of this company?" Caroline hesitated. "Yes, And wouldn't a scandal involving systemic racial profiling be damaging to the company's interests? Objection, Vance said again, more forcefully. This is harassment. Zari ignored him and produced the internal emails from Philip. Exhibit H, Mrs. Caldwell. An internal communication regarding enhanced security protocols. Are you familiar with this policy? Caroline's face went pale. She looked at Vance, who was shuffling his papers, refusing to meet her gaze. I'm not involved in the day-to-day operations. But you are involved in governance, are you not? Zari countered, her voice hardening. You attend board meetings where risk management is discussed. You were aware that the company had settled over a dozen discrimination complaints, all under binding NDAs, to avoid public scandal. Weren't you? This is outrageous, Caroline sputtered. Weren't you? Zari repeated, her voice like steel. The truth, Mrs. Caldwell. You are under oath. Carolyn looked from Zari to Vance. Her perfect facade was cracking, revealing the panicked fury beneath. She knew she was caught in a lie. Admitting knowledge would make her complicit. Denying it would be perjury, and Zari clearly had the evidence to prove it. I may have been peripherally aware of some minor complaints, she finally mumbled. Zari leaned forward. So, when you publicly accused a young black woman of theft in one of your company's stores, a company with a known history of racial profiling complaints, and then filed a $5 million lawsuit against her when she was defended online, was that you acting as a private citizen, Mrs. Caldwell? Or was that you, a director of Luxstyle Holdings, attempting to intimidate a victim into silence to protect your corporate interests and your personal investment? The room was silent, save for the frantic clicking of the court reporter's keys. Caroline Caldwell, for the first time in her life, was speechless. Arthur Vance knew the case was lost. More than that, he knew they had walked into a perfectly laid trap, and the brilliant, 17-year-old lawyer across the table had just snapped it shut. 2 months later, the case of Caldwell versus Henderson went to trial. The story of the 17-year-old lawyer representing herself against a Dallas socialite had become a national sensation. The courtroom was a media circus. Every seat was filled. Activists with signs calling for a boycott of Eclat Boutique lined the steps of the courthouse. The jury was a cross-section of Dallas: a retired postal worker, a software engineer, a stay-at-home mom, a mechanic. They watched with rapt attention as the trial began. Arthur Vance, his confidence visibly shaken since the deposition, gave the first opening statement. He tried to reclaim the narrative, painting Caroline as a pillar of the community who had been viciously attacked by the modern scourge of cancel culture. He portrayed Zari as a cunning opportunist, hungry for fame and a payout. This case, he boomed, gesturing toward Zari, is about a teenager who saw a chance to exploit a misunderstanding for her 15 minutes of fame, and in doing so, destroyed the reputation of a good woman. It was a decent performance, but it lacked conviction. He knew the evidence that was coming. Then Zari approached the jury box. She wore the same simple black blazer. She stood without a lectern, making direct eye contact with each juror. "Good morning," she began, her voice calm and even. "Mr. Vance would have you believe this case is about hurt feelings and a viral video. He is wrong. This case is about power. The power of a corporation to discriminate, the power of a wealthy individual to silence a victim, and the power we all have to speak the truth." She walked them through the events, not just of that day in the boutique, but of the years of buried complaints. "Caroline Caldwell didn't just see a young woman in a sweatshirt," Zari said, her voice dropping to an almost confessional tone. "She saw a stereotype. And the corporation she helps lead, Luxstyle Holdings, has fostered a culture where that stereotype is not only acceptable, it is profitable. They believe it is cheaper to quietly pay off victims than to treat every customer with dignity." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "Mrs. Caldwell is not the victim here. She is the perpetrator, and this lawsuit is not a cry for justice. It is the weapon she chose to finish the job that day in the store. To humiliate, to silence, and to crush someone she thought was powerless. Over the next few days, I will show you that she was wrong. Her first witness was Maya, the college student who filmed the video. She was nervous but articulate, describing the palpable hostility emanating from Caroline and Zari's quiet composure. Vance's cross-examination was clumsy, trying to paint Maya as a co-conspirator, a suggestion she easily refuted. Next, Zari called Philip, the former store manager, to the stand. He was a reluctant witness, testifying under subpoena. He looked haggard, a man who had lost everything. Zari was gentle in her questioning, guiding him through his employment at Eclat, the unwritten policies, and the pressure from corporate to profile certain customers. He authenticated the internal emails, his voice heavy with regret. Vance, on cross-examination, tried to savage him. "Isn't it true, Mr. Phillip, that you were fired for gross misconduct? That you acted alone?" "That's what they said," Philip replied, looking at the jury. "But I was just doing what I was trained to do, what we were all expected to do." His testimony was devastating, a direct link between Caroline's actions and the culture of Lux-style holdings. The trial progressed, with Zari meticulously building her case, brick by damning brick. She was poised, prepared, and brilliant. The jury was captivated. Judge Reed watched, her expression unreadable, but she overruled every one of Vance's increasingly desperate objections. The momentum was undeniable. The stage was being set for the final act. Carolyn Caldwell herself. "The defense calls Caroline Caldwell to the stand." The words hung in the air. A wave of anticipation swept through the courtroom. Carolyn, dressed in a severe navy blue suit, walked to the witness stand with a forced confidence. She avoided looking at Zari. Zari approached the lectern, though she barely touched it. Her examination began, much like the deposition, with simple, disarming questions. But this time, her questions were for the jury's benefit, painting a picture of Caroline's immense wealth and privilege. Then she turned to the incident. Zari had the courtroom's large monitors turned on. "Your Honor, I would like to play the security camera footage from the Eclat boutique, time-stamped to the moment I entered the store." She played the silent, black and white footage. It showed Zari browsing peacefully. It showed her admiring the scarf. It showed Caroline watching her from across the room, her expression a mask of suspicion. It showed the entire confrontation, perfectly corroborating Maya's viral video and Zari's account. It proved Caroline's claim of an attempted theft was a complete fabrication. "Mrs. Caldwell," Zari said, pausing the video on a close-up of Caroline's furious face, "you testified under oath in your deposition that you saw me try to steal a handbag. Does this video show that?" Caroline stammered. "The angle is not... It doesn't show everything." "It shows enough," Zari said coolly. "It shows you lied, under oath." Zari then pivoted to Caroline's role on the board of Lux-style holdings, presenting the emails, the settlements, the evidence of systemic discrimination. With each question, Caroline became more flustered, more hostile, her answers clipped and evasive. Finally, Zari walked back to her table and picked up a thick, leather-bound portfolio. "Mrs. Caldwell, we have established your role as a director of Lux-style holdings and your fiduciary duty to that company. You are a major shareholder, are you not?" "Yes," Caroline admitted through gritted teeth. "And you are aware of the company's history, its origins?" "Of course." "Are you familiar with the name Theodore Henderson?" Zari asked, her voice suddenly soft. Caroline frowned. "No, I don't believe so." Arthur Vance looked confused, thumbing through his notes, trying to find the name. "Theodore Henderson," Zari continued, her voice growing stronger, "was my grandfather. He was a brilliant businessman in the 1970s, a black man from Dallas who had to fight for every opportunity. In 1978, he became a silent partner in a small textile import business. He provided the majority of the startup capital in exchange for a 30% equity stake." That small business eventually grew, acquired other brands, and became the conglomerate we now know as Lux Style Holdings. A gasp echoed through the courtroom. The jury leaned forward as one. Judge Reed's eyes were wide, fixed on Zari. My grandfather was a silent partner because, at the time, the other partners felt that having an outspoken black owner would be bad for business. His name was kept off the official corporate filings, but his equity was secured in a blind trust, managed by a third party. My grandfather passed away 2 years ago, and upon my 17th birthday, as stipulated in his will, that trust was dissolved, and its contents were transferred to his sole heir. Zari looked directly at the stunned face of Carolyn Caldwell. Her voice rose, filled with the weight of generations of injustice, now brought to bear in this single, climactic moment. "I am that heir. Mrs. Caldwell, I am not just a customer you racially profiled. I am the owner of 30% of your company. I am your business partner." The courtroom erupted. The reporters were on their feet. The bailiff yelled for order. Arthur Vance's jaw was on the floor. He looked at his client in horror. Judge Evelyn Reed, for the first time in her storied career, was utterly and completely speechless. Zari's voice cut through the chaos. "So when you lied about me, when you used the legal system to try and silence me, you weren't just committing malicious prosecution. You were actively working against the interests of a fellow shareholder. You violated your fiduciary duty to me and to the company my grandfather built." Carolyn Caldwell stared at Zari, her face a ruin of shock and dawning comprehension. She had tried to swat away a fly, only to discover it was a dragon. The power dynamic had not just been flipped, it had been annihilated. The trial came to an abrupt end. The next morning, a visibly shaken Arthur Vance offered to drop the lawsuit. Zari refused. She wanted a judgment. Judge Reed, having composed herself overnight, entered the courtroom with a thunderous expression. She directed a verdict in favor of Zari, dismissing Caroline Caldwell's lawsuit with prejudice. But she didn't stop there. From the bench, she delivered a blistering indictment of Caroline and her legal team. "In all my years on this bench," Judge Reed began, her voice ringing with cold fury, "I have rarely seen such a flagrant, malicious abuse of our legal system. This court was used not as a tool for justice, but as a weapon for intimidation. Mrs. Caldwell, you lied under oath. Mr. Vance, you brought a frivolous, vexatious lawsuit before this court. I am referring this entire matter to the State Bar for a full investigation into your conduct, and I will be recommending sanctions to the fullest extent of the law." She then turned her attention to Zari. "Ms. Henderson," she said, her tone softening for the first time, "this court owes you an apology. You should not have had to endure this. But you have conducted yourself with a degree of skill, poise, and integrity that is an absolute credit to your profession. You have a very bright future, counselor." She banged her gavel, and it was over. The consequences for Caroline Caldwell were swift and brutal. The Lux Style Holdings Board convened an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove her. News of the trial's stunning conclusion caused the company's stock to plummet by 20% in a single day. Facing a shareholder revolt and a PR nightmare of epic proportions, the board had no choice but to listen when Zari made her demands. Zari, now the company's largest single shareholder, didn't want revenge. She wanted reform. She filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of every customer who had ever been profiled by the company. Faced with mountains of evidence and Zari's unassailable legal position, Lux Style Holdings settled within a month. The settlement was historic. It included a $100 million fund to compensate victims. It mandated a complete overhaul of corporate policy, with Zari's input, to be overseen by an independent diversity and inclusion board. All employees, from the stockroom to the boardroom, were required to undergo rigorous, ongoing anti-bias training from a firm of Zari's choosing. The Eclat boutique in Highland Park Village was temporarily closed, and when it reopened, it had a new manager and a new mission statement, prominently displayed affirming its commitment to equality and respect for all customers. Zari used a portion of her settlement to create the Theodore Henderson Justice Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to providing free legal representation to young people facing discrimination and bullying. Her story became a national inspiration. Law school applications surged, with thousands of young people citing her as their inspiration. She became a symbol of a new generation of leaders, brilliant, fearless, and unwilling to accept the injustices of the old world. She had faced down a giant and won, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. Zari Henderson's victory was more than a legal triumph. It was a seismic event that sent shockwaves through boardrooms and courthouses across the country. It proved that the truth, armed with courage and intelligence, is the most powerful weapon against injustice. Her story is a testament to the fact that one person's refusal to be silenced can expose a corrupt system and spark a movement for profound, lasting change. She reminded the world that power isn't just about wealth or status. True power lies in standing up for what is right, no matter the odds. Zari's fight reminds us that one voice can change the world. If you were inspired by her story, make sure to like this video, share it with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe for more stories of justice and courage. What did you think of the verdict? Let us know in the comments below.